So today's webinar is hosted by Professional Tax Planning and Corporate Payroll Services. The information presented today is provided for educational purposes and should not be considered legal advice. About Hiromi, who is representing professional tax planners. Her parents were immigrants from Japan and the Philippines. They owned Hiromi's Oriental Restaurant, and she was born and raised in Chicago. In 2010, Hiromi became an auditor for CPA firms. And from 2016 to the present, she shifted her specialty to tax return preparation for small businesses, Intuit TurboTax on-demand CPA, internal auditor for construction companies, and freelanced as a CPA consultant. We also have Efrit from Corporate Payroll Services. She has a bachelor's in international business. She's joined Corporate Payroll Services in 1999 and has held a variety of roles in operations, management, and information technology. Today, you will be getting information on what you will need to know to have your paycheck protection loan forgiven and to avoid any fraud charges or jail time. We will begin with Hiromi, and we will have an opportunity for you to ask any questions at the end. If you are able to type in your questions in the chat box, we'll be able to answer those later. So Hiromi, I will go ahead and give you control.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Well, it looks like I have control. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I also thank you to Corporate Payroll for doing a collaboration with me. I built this PowerPoint so that way everyone can understand the PPP forgiveness and get that chance to get that free money. All right. So let's see if this will work. Hold on. Okay. So the general gist of the PPP forgiveness is that we received the cash, right? The lender who provided the cash, it was not SBA who sent over the cash. Your lender used the money that they had at the bank and sent over the cash, and you receive it on, let's say, May 4th, and then you have 8 weeks to prepare the documentation for forgiveness, and it will be a 1% APR if you do not get forgiveness. If you do not get granted the forgiveness, it is 1% APR in a 2-year loan term, and the first 6 months the minimum payments are waived. And guidance was just released last Friday, and it explained on there word for word on when that loan term begins. It's actually when the cash was first received, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And as vague as this sounds, it sounded like the instructions was a little bit more complex than what was originally explained. So let's go over that. Okay. Okay. So the beginning part here is the covered period. And what does that mean? The covered period here is, sorry, there's a little bit of a delay. Okay. Let's say you received the loan on May 5th, and it was distributed on May 5th. So that just means that you have 8 weeks, right, to pay that back. That means 8 weeks from then, June 30th is the last day of the 8-week period, and you have that time period to have your documentation in order. That's the first choice. And a lot of, I guess, borrowers said that they didn't want to start on May 5th when the loan was distributed to them. Instead, they would like to choose an alternate period. And the alternate period is the first pay period that happens after the date of distributed money. Once the money is distributed to you, what is the first day of the first pay period after that? You may choose that day, and let's say if you go through a bi-weekly pay period, then let's just say May 11th is the first day of the next pay period after the loan distribution. So that would mean that everything gets shifted over 8 weeks from that date is July 6th, and you have until July 6th to have all your documentation in order. Okay. And what does that mean? What can you use the money for? As we all know, the allowable expenses are listed on the left side here: payroll, utilities, rent, mortgage interest. Otherwise, you must return the money. And what are the percentages for that? Well, payroll, 75% or more needs to use the loan, right? So the loan, 75% of that needs to be spent on payroll, and that's why it's called Payroll Protection Program, mainly because it is to protect the payroll of your employees, right? If you don't use it, at least 75% or more on payroll, you might get a little bit of scrutiny by the lender. So I would highly suggest that you do use it for more than 75%. You could use all of the loan for payroll, and that's allowed. If you use less than that, your forgivable amount will be reduced. So if you use the loan 75% of that, that means the remaining, if you use the remaining for business utilities, business rent, and business mortgage interest, then 100% of the loan is forgivable, right? And with that, what that means is that mortgage interest, we get a lot of questions on that. It's not the principal, it's only on the mortgage interest. And we'll talk about what defines a utility and what is defined as rent and what is mortgage interest, right? Is that your business home? We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, let's talk about how you can get 100% forgiven on the loan money. So first, just think 75% of the loan needs to be spent on payroll costs, and that is based on the calculations that you first provided to the lender, and then the remaining 25% is used on business utilities, business rent, and business mortgage interest. Okay. Otherwise, return the money, right? It's not of a big deal if you can't get 100% forgiveness, but the remaining amount must be returned with 1% interest. You may choose to pay anytime before the pay date, and that's up to you. Go ahead and pay that money back if you can't plan for this, right? I highly recommend having an Excel spreadsheet of your plan during the 8 weeks. It's only 8 weeks. Have a plan of when payroll is going to be distributed. And by the way, this is for payroll that has been incurred and paid during the covered period or during the alternate covered period. Yes. Okay. Employees cannot, well, the loan cannot be used on payroll with any employee that is paid $100,000 or more as their salary or their bonus or their commissions or anything like that. The maximum amount is around $15,000. Now, if you do the math, that just means that that's an annualized salary for the full year of $100,000. And if you're an owner and an employee at the same time, if you're self-employed, then PPP is saying that you cannot use the PPP fund for more than $15,000, $15,000 around there, across all of your businesses. So you can't pay yourself $100,000 salary for each of your businesses. It needs to be a combined total based on across all of your businesses. All right. So that's just one thing that I caught in the Q&A, in the PPP Q&A in the Treasury government website. Okay. So let's go on to the next slide. I hope that makes sense for everyone. Okay. So here's the EIDL. advance. We started to get more questions about the EIDL advance. Remember, EIDL is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and it's been around for quite a long time, really, and it's only become popular during COVID-19. There were two parts of the EIDL, or EIDL, and some people call it EIDL, but EIDL has two parts. And the first part is the advance, which was $1,000 per employee up to $10,000, and it is considered free money, and it's a grant. It can be used to pay for working capital, right? Some of you have received an offer of an additional loan on top of the advance. So the advance is the free money up to $10,000, and then there's a loan on top of that. Just to let you all know that the EIDL advance will reduce the forgiveness of the PPP, right? And the gist of it is because the SBA does not want double dipping, right? So no double dipping. If you have the EIDL for EIDL advance, for example, let's say you have PPP and you were able to get approved for $10,000 forgiveness. If you've received $3,000 of EIDL money, then that means your total forgiveness amount is $7,000. And you must pay back the $3,000 with 1% APR. Okay, next slide. And what is my weekly payroll? And I understand that a lot will question on this about if you are self-employed, such as you have a Schedule C or you're in a partnership, right? Obviously, you don't pay yourself a W-2, and so it's a bit trickier on and in the instructions, in the guidance here, it is your 2019 net profit divided by 52 weeks, and that's your weekly pay. That is that's the cap to what you can pay yourself. So, for example, in 2019, let's say you had a net profit of $78,000 per year, right? Divide that by 52 weeks, and that means you could pay yourself $1,500 per week. So 1,500 times 8 weeks, that is the maximum that you can use on payroll costs. Okay, and some examples of what you can provide as support. If you have a Schedule C, then the Schedule C from 2019 is what you turn in as support for your payroll. Line 31 is the one that's going to be used to calculate forgiveness. And then if you have anything else other than that, let's say a partnership, then the 1065K1 on the net profit is what is used. Otherwise, if you do run payroll and you put yourself in the payroll because you're an employee and employer at the same time, of course, then you could use the 9-for-1 that can substantiate your payroll. Now, I understand that 9-for-1 is usually turned in every quarter, so it's the payroll report that's coming from corporate payroll or another provider that you use. Those are the payroll reports that needs to be provided when it comes to the payroll costs. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Just put it in the chat box and we'll go over your questions. So, and then what came about is that I had a few phone calls, and they were the phone calls were saying like, what is considered an employee, right? Well, there's a few common questions on this. If the employee is being paid a wage and you present them a W-2 at the end of January 31st of the following year, then yes, the wages that is on the W-2 will be considered forgivable when it comes to using the PPP fund to use on the W-2 wages. So that one's okay. Now, when it comes to yourself, there was some confusion on, okay, if you do not pay yourself a W-2, are you still considered your own employee? Yes, you are. you are a self-employed, so you are an employee of yourself. So you yourself count because you pay self-employment taxes, and that's like another conversation for another day. That's the 15.3% Medicare, Social Security, and all that payroll taxes. So of course you count as an employee because you pay all the relevant taxes for that. For 1099, anyone who is paid a 1099 or are independent contractors, essentially they're their own business. And so the SBA says that no double dipping allowed, because if you use the PPP fund to pay a 1099 employee or 1099 worker, then essentially they are their own business. They can get their own PPP fund, and SBA did not like that. No double dipping allowed. Just the general rule. If you feel like there's a double dipping loophole or anything like that, that's very unlikely to be allowed, and that's just unethical in general. And just think about the morality of it all. Share the love, share the money around. Now, headcount. Part-time employees, full-time employees, the headcount for when you applied for the PPP application, that is your reference headcount for the employees. If you let go or fire or employees, that might hurt you. And the average headcount throughout the covered period will be considered when it comes to the forgiveness amount of your PPP. And the general gist of it, and of course you're more than welcome to read the guidance word for word, but the general gist is that if you reduce your headcount by 25%, then of course your forgiveness amount will be reduced proportionally with that number or with that percentage, right? Now, if you reduce the salary or the wages of the employees by 25% or more, then of course your forgiveness will also be reduced by that percentage. And there is some guidance on there on how you won't get hit twice. That's explained on there, but I highly recommend just using the calculators that lenders provide for that. And basically try to get your head count to be the same amount as when you applied, and same with the salary, and same with the wages. And I did have a few questions on, are hazard pay allowed, are bonuses allowed, are raises allowed? Yes, as long as the employee is not paid over $100,000 for the whole year, then that is okay. So hazard pay, bonuses, commissions or raises and anything like that, as long as the employee will not receive over $100,000 or will not receive that $15,000 per employee during the covered period, you're going to be okay. We will also receive the question of, if an employee quits, will you get penalized for something that is not a consequence of your own action? You will not get penalized for that as long as you have the documentation for it, as long as you have the emails stating that employee didn't not want to work for your company anymore because they wanted unemployment instead of your paycheck or anything like that. That's just an example. Or the employees were let go because let's say you didn't receive the PPP fund fast enough, so you had to let go or furlough the employees. And then once you received the PPP fund, you presented a new offer to the employee for the same rate, the same amount of hours, the same salary and all that. And if the employee still continue to refuse, just keep your documentation on that. You will not get penalized for something that is not a consequence on your actions, because you did try to rehire the employee. Can you hire a different employee to replace that original employee? Yes, you can, as long as the head count is either the same or similar to what you originally applied for, and same for the salary and the hours. I know that was a lot, and I hope that makes sense and answers a lot of your questions. Okay. So what is rent, what are utilities? How do you define those things? And in the guidance, it was laid out that utilities are electricity, gas, water, which is fine. Transportation, a telephone or landline, cell phone, internet, that's okay. Equipment lease, such as like real property, car lease, a mortgage of your business building, things like that, that is okay. Now, when it comes to the business use of home, like the rental space of your apartment building that is being used for business, or when if you have a mansion and you're using a portion of your mansion for business activity, is that considered allowable expense? It was not particularly laid out in the guidance, but as long as when I was reading the guidance, it sounded like there were any issues on there. That is something that you might have to ask the lender on. But the SBA made it sound like that if the IRS allows you to take it as a deductible, a tax deduction, then it should be allowed as long as you have all the proper documentation, as long as you have the lease agreement dated before February 15, 2020, as long as you have the utilities dated before February 15, 2020, and you have the pictures and the documentation of the square footage of what you use for business. Did I mention pictures? Pictures of how the portion of your home is used for business, and all of that. So I would say keep your receipts, keep your invoices, keep a very detailed Excel spreadsheet, use your accountant, use your CPA to document all of that during the 8-week period. Okay, the guidance link is on the left side right there. That was released on May 22nd on Friday, and that just lays out what PPP loan forgiveness can be, how it's calculated and all the nuances. And that is 26 pages. It's not that bad. Feel free to skim it as well. Okay. Now, I did attend an SBA conference. This was not laid out in the guidance, but this was something that was highly recommended by the SBA and the lender. And I just have to say that this is a lot of paperwork and a lot of work, but this is something that they recommend, and I definitely want to pass this along to you. It might sound convoluted, but it definitely makes the job so much easier when you're trying to apply for forgiveness. So for example, make an audit trail. I used to be an auditor, and it always makes me very happy when someone over documents their trail, their audit trail. It makes it easier for everyone to trace back. Okay, so here's the steps. Step 1, deposit the PPP funds in its own bank account. Why do you want to do that? It's because when you ask for the bank statement or when you ask for the activity trail of that bank, only the PPP funds transactions are going through that bank account. So put the PPP funds in its own bank account and buy paper checks. That is what the lenders that I've talked to and the SBA had said, buy paper checks or some type of way to write your notes in a memo on when you spend the PPP fund. Step number 2, and the diagram is on the left side here. Step number 2, write a weekly check to your personal bank account, or however many times you run your payroll, write a check, and in the memo, write payroll from PPP funds, right? That just makes it super duper clear that the transaction is for payroll costs used from PPP funds. There's going to be a check image, and it's just super easy. Go ahead and do that. Now, if it's going to be in ACH or bill pay or anything like that, just make sure there's a section where there's a very clear memo that you can write payroll from PPP funds. And I try to draw a diagram on the left side. I know I couldn't find an icon that showed a check, so just pretend that's a check, and I guess you can mail checks and things like that. So so the bank is step one, then you write yourself a check and for payroll. Step number 3, write a check to each of the allowable expenses that you're going to use this for during the 8-week period, such as business utilities from PPP fund, business rent from PPP fund, or mortgage interest from PPP fund, right? Then when you do step 1, 2, and 3, then it becomes really easy to provide the bank statement with check images to the lender when they approve for your PPP loan forgiveness. And I just want to let you know that the lender is the one who's the gatekeeper for you. The lender will decide and approve the fact that you legitimately use the PPP funds for allowable expenses. Easy? Hope that makes sense. All right, so those were the 3 steps. What is actually required on forgiveness? I found 4 items on the guidance, or it's on the application, on the PPP application on the Treasury website. Item number 1, make sure you have your 2019 tax return. And we did have a few questions on, do you need to turn in or submit your 2019 tax return before you apply for PPP forgiveness? Well, the due date is July 15th. And I would highly recommend that you do file before July 15th, before you, apply for PPP forgiveness. But even if you don't, just make sure that the tax return that you turn into the PPP forgiveness application is fairly accurate. We wouldn't want to lie to the SBA, as there was just an announcement with the SBA and IRS that they have a very strong fraud department, and you wouldn't want anyone to go after you for inaccurate tax returns. Okay. The next item, number 2, is payroll evidence. Make sure that you have that bank statement that I was describing, check images, or the tax form 941. If the 941 does not cover for the entire covered period, then just make sure that you have the payroll report that comes along with your payroll check runs. Okay, and of course, I'm sure corporate payroll can answer to that. Okay, and the third item here is the non-payroll evidence. For things that are considered allowable expenses, such as mortgage interest, the mortgage interest support would be the amortization schedule. The amortization schedule should have the principal and the interest that's on there, and that's what you should be using when it comes to calculating to the mortgage interest. And receipts, of course, on the utilities and the rent, any check images, of course. If you followed step 1, 2, 3 from the previous slide, you shouldn't have a problem with that, right? Account statements, the mortgage statement showing the interest that's on there, the utility agreement, the rent agreement, the lease agreement for your equipment, for your for what you're leasing, you're renting, things like that. So easy peasy, right? And this is not an automatic thing. Your lender needs to make a decision in 60 days. I've heard that some lenders, they don't have their application ready. And when I read the guidance, it was saying that once the application is turned in to the lender, they have 60 days to make that decision. And as I read that guidance, it made it sound like that clock starts ticking at the end of the 8-week period, because obviously you can't apply for it in the beginning on week 1 because you don't have any of the documentation yet, right? So on week 8, you need to immediately ask for that PPP forgiveness. That means you don't return any of the money back, and that would be super awesome if 100% is forgiven. Even if you have to return some of it, it's not a problem, right? And it's only 1% interest rate, but free money is nice. If you have any specific questions on the PPP forgiveness, on things that it's on the discretion of the lender, I highly recommend to talk to your lender. Your lender is they are the gatekeeper. I'm sure their phone lines is going off the hook right now. Some lenders are providing free PPP forgiveness information. It's kind of very similar to the way we are. And I would say they're the gatekeeper. They're the ones who should know what type of documents they're going to require. Okay. All right. And I know some of you're business owners, and I got some emails and things like that of what if I already spent the money? This is what drives an auditor or a CPA. They're saying, stop, please don't spend the money. But some people already had. What do we do? And I just want to first say that this may be a problem because in the PPP closing documents, you did certify that you knew what you were signing up for, and that you knew what the PPP forgiveness rules are, and that you knew that 75% or more of the PPP fund should be used on payroll, right? Okay, so there are some people who are now having to talk in court just because they used it on jewelry or buying a Rolls Royce and things like that. So please don't do that. There comes jail time and fines that come along with that. And so I have some solutions for you. What should you do if you've already spent that you spent that money on things that you did not document and that were allowable expenses? Well, here's the CPA doctor. Okay. I'm your doctor. I'm your financial doctor. Solution number one, reset. Please put that money back. If you receive $10,000 and you spend $3,000 on things that you shouldn't have, please put that $3,000 back. And then put the $10,000 in a separate bank account like we've described in step 1, 2, and 3. Solution number 2, let's say you're low on your cash flow. And okay, what do you do now? Well, if you didn't use it for allowable expenses, then please document it. Keep a record of your receipt and your documents, and just have an Excel spreadsheet of where that money was spent, and with the bank statement and traces, with like a red pen with like put a tick mark A, and then mark it with A1, A2, or something like that. Ask an auditor for help. As for the remainder of the PPP funds, go ahead and put that in a separate bank account and follow steps 1, 2, and 3. And don't ever do that again. Step number 3, ask your lender for help. If they are able to answer the telephone and answer your questions, of course, in the next week, well, actually, we might find out more from the SBA and what the guidance might entail. But either way, we have the guidance that we have now. The lender might have exactly what they need from you, and maybe all that excess documentation might not be necessary. So ask the lender what exactly they need from you, and maybe you could craft up something when you go through your archives of documents, right? And solution number 4, maybe you could just allocate the funds in your accounting system, right? At this point, if you have payroll, I would think that a lot of you have an accounting system, right? And keep your records in order. If you have QuickBooks Online, go ahead, log in and create a class. Now in QuickBooks, they did send out guidance on how to allocate your PPP fund in a separate class and allocate the fund to where it needs to go. And you could see that separated out in your P&L, your profit and loss. but I highly recommend that you contact your CPA. I'm putting in a shameless plug here. I'm a CPA. Just go ahead and ask me any questions on that. I was a former auditor, and there are certain ways that I like to view my financial statements, or not mine, but more so things that I'm reading when it comes to financials. All right, so those are the 4 solutions, and I hope that helps you out and ease your pain. You know, nothing to worry about. Everything is going to be okay. Okay. And here are some references. Of course, there were links earlier in the other slides with the FAQ, I think, frequently asked questions. Yes. FAQ. In the Treasury website, there's a lot of free information out there. They're not as pretty as how I've laid it out here, but that's okay. The information is there, and if you want to read more about the disaster program by the SBA, of course, you can always go to www.sba.gov/disaster. Okay. And then if you want to speak to someone, of course, they are very busy. You can go ahead and contact them at you can find the local office at sba.gov/local-assistance, and you will find the local office closest to you. Call their number. I think that they have some emails on there. They're quite busy, so the wait time might be 2 hours. But you know, it's better than nothing. Now you know where they are, and it's not like this is a new place, right? Definitely find out how to be there, how to contact them. They might not be accepting in-person meetings at this moment, but at least they're answering their telephones. Okay. And PPP rules, it looks like the Treasury Department is, they're the ones publishing the rules. Right now, of course, SBA comes up with the rules, and sometimes they put it on their website, and it looks like treasury.gov website are organizing and compiling it on there. Well, if you go to www.treasury.gov and there's a red banner at the top, you click on that, and it comes with all the guidance you ever need to know and all the frequently asked questions. And of course, to get the SBA forgiveness application, if you want to see the actual document, go ahead and click on the last link there. I think PPP round 2 still has money. The deadline to apply for that is June 30th. If you're one of those who's still thinking about it, but please do not continue to think about it. This is something that you must hurry and get that. Now I did hear about, so this is a little different. So EIDL. Do you need to put EIDL in a separate bank account? I did some research, and of course, some of my clients had EIDL and PPP. What we've done for my firm is that what my firm did is that we created 2 different classes, one for EIDL and one for PPP. And as long as they're not paying for the same expenses, then we should be okay. And as long as we're documenting where EIDL funds are going and where PPP funds are going, then we should be okay. Just to let you know, I did read the closing documents for EIDL, and it did have a clause in there that at the SBA's discretion, they can request an audit of your financial statements, and they may request a review of your financial statements. What that means is that you might need to hire an independent CPA to review or audit your financial statements based on what the SBA wants. And I know that isn't cheap, okay? Just be very aware. And that's why some of my clients didn't sign for the EIDL, because of that clause. They were quite afraid of an audit forced upon them. Okay. So PPP aside, I just want to reiterate, please treat your business as a business, really. And I know for self-employed people, not everyone finds accounting as important, but it's important because You gather your documents, you organize your receipts, your bank statements, and the accounting system that gets all pulled in together. And what you do that for is because you build financial statements so you could spend the needed time to analyze how your business is doing. It's not just about the cash that's in your bank account, right? It's about how you need to analyze what's a percentage of the sales are being used for what expenses, and that's what's important. And you can't really get that without having proper records, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So we got to make sure that good records are in your financials. And at the end of the day, when you have good financials, then you could think about strategizing for taxes, right? And a lot of us know that a huge portion of the net profit goes to taxes, and that's why the net profit has to pay the self-employment taxes. But there are ways to get around that, and that's why it's called loopholes, right? Legitimate loopholes. And the one that, of course, doesn't bring you to jail. That we're all about morality here, and that's very, very important. But that's another conversation for another day, and this is about PPP forgiveness, right? Okay, so why am I here? My firm is called Professional Tax Planning, and I am here because I really want to help everyone here, from the goodness of my heart, of course, and to help with the tax planning and the savings, to answer your questions, to save you time. And I know this is a lot of information, and I try to, it was 26 pages on the guidance, and there was just a lot of words in there. I try to visualize it, and because I am an accountant artist, and I try to put it in a visual way that is easier to understand, because that's just how my mind works. So I hope that helps you out a lot. And I will give this back to Corporate Payroll. Thank you so much for listening to me as I'm going to go skim through the chat, and yep, and I will give this back to Corporate Payroll. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiromi. That was great. Lots of valuable information. From Corporate Payroll Services side, I just wanted to point out a couple things. We are working on a PPP Loan Forgiveness supplemental report, which would be equivalent to the Schedule A worksheet that's on your application. So we're trying to provide you with as much information as possible that you'll need to submit along with your loan forgiveness application. So that's currently in development. I'm hoping within a week and a half turnaround time, 2-week period. So I'll keep everybody posted on that. I also saw a couple questions regarding bank account changes. As Hiromi stated, if you have already made changes to your bank account, on Corporate Payroll Services side, on your payroll account, you have a couple options. You can start over by making changes going forward to do what Hiromi has suggested, or you can start manually paying back what's not eligible back into your PPP account. So we do allow you to make changes to 3 different bank accounts. So you're able to have one bank account for your payroll fees. You can have another bank account for your payroll taxes. And then you can have a third bank account for handling the net pay of your employee checks, whether that's issued by a payroll check or direct deposit. So you can have up to 3 different bank accounts. I do suggest that the PPP bank account is not under the payroll fees. The cost for processing your payroll is not an eligible cost, so that should not be coming out of your PPP bank account. Also, another non-eligible costs are employers' portion of the Social Security and Medicare, so employers' portion of FICA, employers' federal unemployment tax, the workers' compensation insurance. So those taxes and the workers' comp is usually lumped into the tax debit, so it might be easier to pay back that amount that you owe for the employer's share of taxes that are not eligible. And we have a tax withholding liabilities report that would itemize which taxes, the amount for each of those types of tax debits. And then the net pay, which is paid to your employees, that is an eligible cost. So you can have your PPP bank account set up under the net pay. But highly recommend what Hiromi suggested as far as paying back directly, but in a form of a check from your PPP, so that accounting purposes, everything is clear. All right, I think we should go to your Q&A. Okay, I'll turn it over to you if you want to go over the questions we have.
Thank you. Okay, so we do have some time for a few questions. So the first question I have here is, my lender made a big mistake. My approved funds is not close to even one biweekly payroll. I have reached out to them since May 4th, but there's no feedback. Can one apply with another lender? I have not touched my PPP that's been approved because it does not even cover payroll.
All right, so I'm back here. Well, first I'd like to ask, who is the lender? Because once you accept, or once that amount has been approved, the SBA will decline any further PPP applications from any other lender. I don't know if you've already signed the closing documents, right? But when I've applied to multiple lenders, the moment I received an SBA number, right, an SBA application number, all my other applications after that were denied, because obviously SBA will stop anything that use the same EIN, right? The EIN or Social Security number, depending on how you report your business. So unfortunately, that's all I can say, is that the lender will need to respond, write a letter, an email. I'm really sorry. That's as much as I can do and say.
Thank you. A next question I have here is, I got my PPP funding on May 4th, but I paid my insurance premiums in April. Can I use the health insurance premiums in the calculation for the forgiveness?
Now, since you've paid in April 27th, and that's outside of the covered period, outside of either the covered period and outside of the alternate covered period, then no. It needs to be incurred, which is an accrual expense, right? It needs to be incurred and paid, which is also cash. So incurred and paid within the covered period. So by that small description, I don't think so, no.
Okay, what if even though they paid in April 27th, what if it was for their May coverage? So the coverage was for May, but they paid in April. Do you think that would be covered?
I actually think that might be considered. Yeah, that seems more reasonable. Yeah, that's something that I haven't seen in the FAQ. So see if the lender will accept that, because they'll be the ones who review your documentation.
Okay, let's see.
Oh, well, I do have to add something. If you follow my steps 1, 2, and 3, right? If you write a check within the covered period, then that would be your evidence that the cash came out during the covered period. See if the lender will accept that.
Let's see, I'm looking through more questions. We have payroll twice a month. Do we count the payroll that is paid out during the period, or do we have to finagle the info that would be payroll specifically that starts on the date we received the loan? I don't know if I asked that right.
Like for my payroll, right? I pay myself twice a month, on the 15th and on the 30th. And I've realized that when I did the math, it would only cover 3 full pay periods during the covered period plus a half. And that's why there's that step 1, 2, and 3 to write a check for that payroll amount. So what I'm thinking of doing is writing a check for half of the payroll for the first distribution, right? I'll still pay the full payroll, but I'm going to reimburse myself using the PPP funds for half of the payroll period that is in the covered period, right? And then after that, I don't have to worry about it because the full payroll period is going to be within the covered period. And now if there's going to be like 2 days worth of the pay period that's going to be in the within the covered period, yes, you can include that as well. I hope that makes sense. Let us know if you need more clarification on that. It needs to be incurred and paid within the covered period.
And just a reminder for everyone, if we won't be able to get through all questions today. So if you do have a question that was not answered, I have Hiromi's information up here. And then I will also resend out Effort's information from Corporate Payroll, just in case you have questions regarding payroll that Effort can answer. I have another question here. I am 100% owner of my S Corp. I haven't done my 2019 taxes, so I don't have a net profit number reported with the IRS. How do I calculate my salary?
Gotcha. Guess what? I am also an S Corp. I'm an S Corp. I'm 100% owner of professional tax planning. Well, if you're an S Corp, there is a clause in the IRS that says you must pay yourself a reasonable salary, right? So I provided documents for the application for the PPP fund originally using my 2020 numbers because I paid myself more in 2020 versus 2019. Now, I expect anyone who has an S Corp to be paying themselves a W-2, running their own payroll. I am my own employee. I'm the only employee and I work with other independent contractors, so I only run payroll for myself only. And so my 941 only has one employee. It has, at the end of the year, in January 31st, I send out one W-2 and a W-3 for the total of all the W-2s, and it just so happens that I hand myself the W-2. So if you have an S Corp, you need to pay yourself a wage, and a reasonable wage, anything that's under $100,000. So as long as it's, what's that amount? $15,385. As long as you pay yourself a wage during the 8 weeks of $15,385, like less than that, that should be considered your payroll. I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
All right, so I have time for a few more questions. So this one says, I've already started using the PPP loan and I haven't followed the recommendations of a new bank account and checks. Will I be penalized?
You won't be penalized as long as you could prove that you didn't do anything, wrong or anything illegal, or that you didn't have the intention of buying frivolous jewelry with that. So I had that slide about the solutions, right? If you have if you have excess cash lying around, put that money back, and then you could follow those instructions with the checks. But if you legitimately use the funds for allowable expenses, gather what you have, gather your bank statements, the transactions, print it out, put a red pen, take some notes, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and just go back, act like an auditor, and document where the funds went.
Thank you. Effort, I believe this question will be for you. If the payroll company is directly deducting from the PPP account I created, will they be sending the documentation?
So you'll have, since the PPP bank account is set up on payroll, on your invoice, you'll be able to see the bank account ending number. So that's part one of documentation that you could provide. Another is your bank statement. They'll be able to see the debit that says Corporate Payroll Services, taxes, direct deposit, or however it's what you changed it for. So two documentation. One is on your invoice and one would be your bank statement.
Thank you. I believe we have room for one more question. Let's see. If I'm unable to call my bank or my lender, do you know if they are reaching out to people?
Some lenders are reaching out to people. I did take the PPP loan distribution from Pinnacle, and if you look up Pinnacle, that's a bank, and they're laying out all their PPP information out there, and they're hosting webinars that they can answer questions to. So some lenders are more helpful than others. And so that I can't really answer. That's more like lender specific. JP Morgan Chase, they haven't been answering, mainly because they're a very big bank. But normally, you know, Chase, that's a physical bank. You could, you know, walk down the street and visit them. So yeah, that depends on your lender.
Okay, and one final question. What if the bank says that the date you received the funds are April 24th, but you actually didn't receive those funds until April 27th?
Okay, well, you should have a bank statement, right, to show proof of like the actual evidence. They might have sent it a couple days earlier, and they might have seen it on their side, but you don't see it because, of course, it takes time for the transfer to happen, right? So as long as you have the documentation for it, and the PPP forgiveness said the first day that the PPP loan amount is received, right? And so you haven't received it until that day, right? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have, Hiromi, 10 more minutes, and I can actually get through all the questions if we had just 10 more minutes?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. So if you keep good records, should you still get a separate bank account? I'm only using the PPP for the net check wages for corporate payroll right now. Also, after the 8 weeks, if the money is not completely done, should I give it back? Or how would you give it back? Sorry.
Right. And the lender needs to provide more documents or more information on that. So after the 8-week period is over, right? And you sound like a partnership, or you're using your net profit, so you're probably a Schedule C or something like that, K1 or something. So you have your tax return from 2019. You're going to use that for support. I don't see it being necessary to follow steps 1, 2, and 3 if you're not going to follow through with the rest of expenses, utilities, and all that. And it's very understandable. Treasury Department had mentioned that self-employed people might have issues with that. So yes, you will pay that money back with 1% interest using a 2-year loan term. And I believe there's going to be more information from the lender after the 8 weeks is over.
Okay. Is health premium allowed as an expense?
Yes.
Okay. Is a salary bonus considered a forgivable payroll cost?
Salary bonus is considered a forgivable cost because it's still considered payroll. Commissions, bonuses, salary raises, they are considered payroll costs as long as the total salary of that employee is less than $100,000.
Thank you. What if we were only approved payroll for the PPP loan, not utilities or rent? If we use the $10,000 from the EIDL for rent and utilities, can we have both forgiven?
Gotcha. Well, now for the PPP, I know there were a lot of confusion during the application. For the PPP loan amount, they didn't ask for how much you spend on utilities, mortgage interest, and rent because it was embedded within the total PPP amount. That's what they're thinking. If you're a self-employed, this sounds like a self-employed person question, Schedule C or K1, net profit. If you used net profit to calculate the total PPP fund, they actually gave you 10 weeks worth of payroll, and they will only forgive you for 8 weeks worth of payroll. And they were hoping that the 2 extra weeks that they provided to you in your PPP loan would cover for the utilities, rent, and mortgage interest. That's what they were hoping in the documents. So technically it's embedded in the PPP loan already. Now, when it comes, the second question on there was that, can you get the EIDL advance forgiven? That there's no forgiveness on that. It's already yours. It's already a gift to you. So if you have the full $10,000, it's yours. You keep it. It's supposed to be used for your business working capital, and that follows a whole separate different set of rules by the SBA. That money is from the SBA, and you could use that. You keep it. It's an advance. It's yours. The PPP is the PPP fund is from the lender. That's the lender's money, and that's why they follow a whole different set of rules. Can you get both the PPP forgiveness and the EIDL advance? Essentially, the rules state that if you have $10,000 in the EIDL and you have the PPP forgiveness, the EIDL advance will reduce your forgiveness. That's just how it works. That's how it was explained. And yep.
What if payroll is paid only once a month? How does the covered pay period get calculated?
Then the payroll cost is, okay, let's say you pay yourself. Okay, let me just think of this with numbers and dates. All right, so you're paying yourself. It's almost the end of the May 29th, because you only pay yourself on the last business day of the month, right? So May 29th. So May 29th, only that last, if you've received the fund on May, let's say, what was Monday? Okay, let's say you received the funds on May 25th. And your first payroll is May 29th. Then of course, you run payroll for the whole month, and then the last week is what you need to consider as reimbursable by the PPP fund on May 29th. And then when June 30th rolls around, of course, then the whole month, June 1st through June 30th, the whole payroll period is covered, and the whole entire payment is covered. And then after that, you have until a few days in July. Then only a portion of the pay period will be considered.
Okay, it seems like we lost you for a moment, Hiromi. Let's see.
Sorry, I didn't hear everything.
Yeah, I lost you for a moment. Halfway through that last answer. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was a connection loss.
All right, let me repeat. Okay, so
Okay, let's see. Okay, if anyone is still able to hear me, it seems like we do have a connection loss.
I'm back.
Okay. Since we keep losing you, I guess this would be a good place to end. And this way, I've had your information on the slides, so they can go ahead and schedule a call with you if there are any more questions. And again, if any questions that you have for EFRIC, you can send that over to Corporate Payroll. I will be sending out this webinar replay later on today or early tomorrow, so check your emails for that. And the slides will be sent as well. So thank you so much, Hiromi, for doing this webinar with us. I really appreciate it. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Sorry for the internet issue.
No worries, it happens. And so we're going to go ahead and end the webinar now. And just look out in your email, your inboxes in a couple hours for the slides and for the link to the replay. Thank you guys for joining, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you, Hiromi. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.